Hello, my name is Zane Peary, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 6 case study. Can we trust big data? In this, we looked at big data and then whether or not companies should use this and the best uses for it, and then the things to look out for, and then whether or not I guess you should use it. So the first question is, what business benefits do the companies and service described in this case achieve by analyzing and using big data? So by using big data, companies like Spotify were able to produce custom playlists for each listener that fit their specific listening habits and broke them up into genres. For me, that's one feature I love about Spotify, because like each week, based on my listening, they'll provide me with like 5 different custom playlists. Like there's some with hip hop music, some with country, some with rock. So it's really cool. And then like each playlist will have a bunch of similar type artists that I like, and then some are new artists that I haven't heard before, but the music's kind of similar. So it's interesting how they were able to create a system like that off of using big data. And then another example is Skyscanner, which uses big data to sort flights by price, duration, and for that specific airline. And overall, that just saves the customer time and money, which overall increases profitability for Skyscanner. Second question is, identify 2 decisions that the organizations described in this case that were improved by using big data and 2 decisions that were not improved by using big data. So big data has helped companies like Skyscanner, and then as well as the national healthcare system. It helps them cater to people's specific needs as well as personalize and more accurately solve problems. So McKinsey Global Institute reported that healthcare companies could save about $300 billion a year, or $1,000 per American, which is actually crazy. That's a very big number of savings, um, and they're able to do that through better integration and analysis of data produced by clinical trials, health insurance transactions, etc. Big data, however, has hurt companies like Google and StreetBump due to issues with bias and wrongful interpretation of the data. Google, for example, used big data to try and assess the influenza rate in the US, using the rate of searches related to influenza. Google determined that the rate that year came to be about 11% in the US, and then that following year when the CDC did their what do you call it? When they did their investigation, they came to find that it was only about 6%. So for Google, just because people were Googling influenza or searches like similar to influenza didn't necessarily mean that they had it. So it was just a matter of interpreting the data, and Google just wasn't able to do that as clearly using big data as like more hands-on, like the CDC was able to do, using like direct hospital um, numbers and forms, stuff like that. So that was a big issue with using big data, is it just wasn't as accurate, and it didn't account for like mass Googling, I guess, necessarily. I didn't mean to go back. But anyway, so the second one was for Street Bump, which was an app that the objective was to try to find street potholes around the Boston area, and then it would help companies, the paving companies, be able to go in and fix those spots. But what Street Bump didn't account for was the fact that more impoverished areas were less likely to have smartphones, and then obviously less likely to use that application. So areas like that weren't getting the coverage that they needed. So more of like the wealthier areas were the ones that were getting their roads fixed, versus the more impoverished neighborhoods weren't getting their roads fixed because there was no knowledge of the potholes. So that's just another example of how like system bias can kind of play in, and not being able to fully interpret the data. So it's important to get to like have a clear understanding of the data and know how to like directly um, like depict that and understand it. For the third question, it was list and describe the limitations to using big data. So what I just talked about, systematic bias, It's harder to draw correlations between different data points because you're looking at just a vast like a vast population of data, so it's hard to really correlate that together. And then you need to have a really good knowledge of the data and know exactly kind of what you're supposed to be looking for. And then lastly, just there needs to be a purpose, a goal, an objective, whatever. You need to know like exactly what you're looking for, or else you can easily get lost in the data and then just like misinterpret things, and then it's just a snowball effect of you just get lost. So those 4 things I found to be the most important. Um, yeah, I think I covered it for that. And then for the last question, should all organizations try to analyze big data? Why or why not? And then what people, organization, and technology issues should be addressed before a company decides to work with big data? So the use of big data completely depends on the company and the goals that that company has set for using data. If the company is too small and doesn't directly have a goal in mind or know what they're looking for, it can lead to problems and eventually failure of the software. Bigger companies may find a great use for big data, like personalizing each customer's experience and tailoring products or services to their needs. It is important, though, that clear objectives are made, or else all of the data goes to waste or it becomes too overwhelming to translate. Furthermore, big data takes a trained understanding to use appropriately and to like correctly draw conclusions or correlations from properly. The user has to understand potential biases that may distort the information or lead you to draw unnecessary conclusions. And then lastly, overall, big data in the right hands can be a huge asset to one's company, but in the wrong hands can be a large detriment and consume too much time and money. One potential question I was thinking of just during the whole case study was what other applications use big data very well or better than Spotify. So I mean I was just very impressed with how Spotify like is able to use their big data. I didn't know before this case study that was specifically like the biggest tool that they use to help personalize each user's experience. So that was interesting. So then I just Googled like top companies that use big data, and Netflix and Amazon were both on there. So Netflix uses a lot of big data to find recommendations to TV shows and movie titles for each user, which actually like I would probably have to say Netflix is probably up there for like being one of the good applications that personalizes like your I guess your preferences. They're really good about that. And then they also use big data to like decide whether or not they're gonna purchase the rights to a new movie or not, just based on like popularity of that movie or TV title. So that's helpful for them. They don't want to just purchase the rights to random movies and then it doesn't create like a big wave or nobody really cares enough, and then that just doesn't help them at all. Then they've wasted all that money buying the rights to that movie or TV show, and then nobody pays to watch those things. So they want to be careful on what they purchase the rights to, and big data helps that. And then lastly, another example is Amazon. They have access to like your credit cards. They can see everything you're buying, and then so they can kind of like drive their like motivations toward what you're buying. So it helps them more personalize your your spending, and then they can kind of more appeal to you for that. And then lastly, in conclusion, based on the case study, big data can be a very valuable tool, but requires a deeper understanding than most understand. To use big data properly, a user must understand how system biases work, whether or not a correlation is occurring, a specific goal objective needs to be set, or an understanding of how to read big data is needed. If a company is too small, big data may not apply to them and may actually lose them money if predictions or correlations are read wrong. And then if a company does not have a clear goal for using big data, the user can easily get lost and begin pulling data for no reason, thus wasting time and money for that company. And then overall, big data can be a very helpful tool, but the company needs to fully understand what and how to use this data, or they could find themselves neck deep in useless information. So yeah, just going back to the 4 bullet points I named was just like system bias, understanding the information, like setting up clear goals, objectives for what you really want to be looking for, and then just a deep understanding of how to use this information and like not to necessarily just jump at certain conclusions and then like just understanding proper correlations. So you're not just lost in the sea of big data. But that's about it. And then here's why we're excited. Thank you.